good afternoon, everyone. We are back. It is Wellness Wednesday once again, and the South Fulton Mental Health Collaborative has gotten back two great speakers for you today. There's a lot that's been going on this past summer, and so we wanted to get some speakers that were here to be able to address some of the concerns that the community is having. So we're glad to be back and glad to have you back as well as we start back our Wellness Wednesday program. So today I have two great speakers that we're here. We have Dayana Regis, who is a certified nurse practitioner who's originally from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and she's completed her undergraduate work at Fort Valley State University with a bachelor's in biology. She earned her second bachelor and master's degree from Emory University, and she's living in Hiram, Georgia with her daughter, Sophie. On her spare time, she enjoys spending time with her friends and family, hiking, traveling, and parenting and listening to music. And she'll be presenting some information to us about the student health services and how it operates within the school system. And then we have our second speaker, who will be Jodi Miller, who is a PhD student at the Johns Hopkins University in the School of Education and the creator of an app called WellCheck. She's a former high school teacher who's passionate about supporting students and cultivating their potential. Her research focuses on how stress affects the brain and cultivating brains, bodies, and achievement of students. She also examines how we measure stress and what schools can do to buffer against the negative effects for children. Her secondary interest includes teaching, well-being, and how it is important for student outcomes. Jodi also graduated from University of Pennsylvania with her BA in Biology Basis of Behavior in 2014 and with her master's degree in Education Policy and Secondary Education in 2015. After leaving Penn, she taught 10th grade biology and 12th grade anatomy in Philadelphia for 3 years. During her tenure, she loved watching her students thrive. Together, they achieved a 400% increase in proficiency on the state biology exam during her tenure there. Jodi's experience teaching inspired her to pursue her PhD and create WellCheck. She loves working with students, teachers whose roles are complex, crucial, and extremely rewarding. And she wants everybody to know that not all superheroes wear capes. So we have two superheroes on here with us today. And so we're going to be focusing on looking at the student as a whole individual as far as their health and their mental well-being. So I'm going to turn it over to Dayana Regis, who's our nurse practitioner. She's going to get us started. So welcome and thank you for coming on.
Hi, Beth. Thank you for having me today. It is nice to be able to come in and talk to you guys. First, I'm going to give you a little background of what the school-based health center is. Basically, it's when you have a clinic instead of the school. The school usually have their school nurse, which is each school has. Then you also have an additional school clinic. So how it works is let's say your child is coughing, is not feeling well, and then they go see the school nurse. Then the school nurse will give them some rest and ask them questions and see how they're feeling, right? Then if they don't feel better in the next 15 or 20 minutes, or they have a fever, or they're vomiting and things like that, then they escalate them to see to the clinic, which is where I come in. So the school-based health center is a regular clinic, like you would go bring your kid to a pediatrician. We do WellCheck, we do sport physicals, we do immunization, sick visit, asthma check, we do everything. So instead of the main focus is to help the kids stay in school longer or to miss less day of schools. So instead of you bringing them to their pediatrician, you sign a consent form for us, and then the nurse send them to the clinic. So then when they come to the clinic, I see them assess their symptoms, do a full checkup. If there are tests to be done, just like a strep test or flu test, we do it. And then we take it from there. We call the parents and then let the parents know what's going on. If they prefer their kid to get a medication, if that's appropriate, we do that. Or then if they need to go home, the parent come and get them. So this is usually the regular flow of the school-based health center. And we have, so far with my company, we have 4 in Georgia, 1 in Sandy Springs, 1 in Douglasville, 1 in College Park, and 1 in North Clayton. So that's how it works so far. Now with the pandemic, the flow is we have any symptoms like the kid is coughing, a headache, any symptoms that we might think is COVID related, which can be anything else like allergies and runny nose and things like that. So they go to the nurse's office, and then the nurse sees them. If it's not something too bad, if they're feeling better after a few minutes, then they return to class. If not, they're sent here. Then I assess them, do a physical on them, and then determine if it's allergies, if I think it's strep flu related or anything else, or if it's COVID. Now, if they come with a fever, usually depending on the school, they automatically like to send them home, have their parent pick them up. But if not, then they come to the clinic, then we do two tests. We do the flu test and we do the strep test because they also look similar. Then if those tests are negative, the kids still, we treat them for the pain and the fever with Tylenol. And then they get sent home, then they get tested for COVID because we do not do COVID tests. And because they have to have a COVID negative test to come back. So with the pandemic, that's how we've been doing necessarily. So it hasn't been too bad. So far, we haven't had a lot of students, at least where I work, coming with fever or bad symptoms. Most of them come with abdominal pain, runny nose, and mostly it's been related to allergies. So the school have been doing pretty well so far with containing it because most of the students, at least where I work, they wear masks. And then they do the physical distancing and they stay in pods. They always in the same group. So it's been easier to do the tracking. And whenever they have symptoms, if the parents feel easier for them to go home, so we send them home. But so far, we haven't really had a big outbreak in any of the schools that I work at. So it's been pretty good.
Okay, and thank you for that. And one thing that I want to just ask briefly, because I know some parents have had concerns. There's been this debate. There are these infographics out there about the symptoms of COVID, and for kids, fever, nausea, vomiting can be a part of those symptoms. And people are encouraging, if your child has symptoms, stay at home. How many symptoms is it like? Because the thing is, right now we have the flu that's starting out now. We know that. We also have issues going on with allergies in September. We're about to kick up another allergy season for younger kids. The adenovirus is going on. I think some of the conversations have led to the fact that we have a lot of people that there are just a lot of different things that are going on out there we missed last year because kids weren't in school. So how do you guide a parent to go into the mindset of, hey, we have these symptoms, what should we really do? Should we keep them home? I know typically if there's a fever, it's automatic, they really should stay home. But how do you guide a parent in making those decisions about whether to go to school, not to school?
Now, all of those diseases have related symptoms, which every kid gets, runny nose and cough and things like that. For instance, if they have a cough, if they're coughing constantly to the point where they can't keep a mask, they're automatically going to send the kid home because the main thing is to be able to protect the kid and the other students. If their nose is very runny to the point that they always have to blow their nose, it's better to keep them home, or you automatically bring them to their pediatrician to determine exactly what's going on. Usually they're gonna go down the line. I hope they wouldn't just jump to the conclusion it's COVID. So based on everything, based on your physical exam, they're gonna see if it's allergies, if the kid is catching a cold, then they go down the line. If they have fever, then they will do a strep test first, and then the flu test, depending on how high the fever is. Then if everything comes back negative, then they do the COVID test. So it depends on how bad the symptoms are. If the kid is just like has nasal congestion, but they're not coughing, no runny nose and things like that, as long as they can keep the mask on, they breathe normally, it should be safe for them to come to school. But if it's bad enough that they can't keep anything on, or they're tired, or they feel sleepy, then it's better to keep them home and then bring them to the pediatrician. At least you can rule out anything that's going on, and then you can just send them to school with a note saying, okay, it's only allergies. And then they're on the medication for allergies.
Okay. And then just one other thing, and thinking I've talked to some parents, and I'm glad to hear that your school is doing well with their infection rates. But now you're starting to get some schools that like almost like I've heard people that have gotten like 3 or 4 letters saying that they
Mm-hmm.
had an exposure, at variable levels, low risk or high risk. And as far as when they get these letters, what is your thoughts about testing? Because that's the thing, you get 3 or 4 letters. I know some parents that are testing their child weekly. They're taking them
Mm-hmm.
weekly to get a nasal swab. And then of course there's some confusion because you got a letter today, 2 days later, you get another letter. Like when is the best, like what guidance would you provide some people as far as like testing their kids? Because I don't want people to go out there and having their kids nasal swab every 2 or 3 days if it's
Every,
not,
yeah.
necessary. But from what you're seeing and what you're hearing, being that you manage the pediatric population, what is your best recommendation to help guide people in making the decision to get their child tested if they've been exposed?
Okay. Uh, if they've been exposed, meaning if they are in close contact, for instance, usually right now they have pods of 4 in the classroom. They sit in 4. So let's say they have their classmate who sits on the table with them tested positive. So those 3 other kids who sit at the table are considered close contact. So those kids automatically have to quarantine. Okay. Now, the other kids in the classroom, according to the CDC, do not have to quarantine, but you have to make sure that the parents pay close attention to any symptoms because they can have symptoms up to 14 days after after they've been exposed. Now, if you decide to test the close contact, they would test them 3 to 5 days after they expose because the virus duplicate or replicate. It takes, they call it an incubation period. So it takes the virus 3 to 5 days in order to multiply enough for them to show up as positive or to start showing symptoms. If you do, let's say you get a letter from the school that said, oh, your child was exposed today and they need to stay home. If you go get a test, get a child tested now, they might have a false negative or false positive because they just got exposed. So what we usually tell them is wait at least 3 to 5 days from the date of exposure and get them get it tested. Now, if the kid is fine, the kid never shows any symptoms. Now it's to the discretion of the parent or the school for them to get tested or not. For instance, some school says, well, you quarantine for 10 days. If you never had any symptoms, you can come back. Some says, well, you have to show a negative test. So that's at the discretion of the parent and the school. But what we usually say is 3 to 5 days from the date of exposure. If they start showing symptoms beforehand, definitely get them tested. But do not get them tested before that incubation period, which is a 3 to 5 days, even if they're quarantining or not. So, but if they show symptoms beforehand, then definitely get them tested before that.
Yeah, no, I think that's just a lot of the anxiety and the stress of it, wanting to, as parents, wanting to do what's best for your
For
kid.
kid.
And then,
Mm-hmm.
and as you even pointed out, you're in a couple of different districts. And
Yeah.
so, it's a hodgepodge because you have District A doing one thing, District B doing another, and everybody's
Mm-hmm.
kind of working off of the CDC guidelines. That makes it difficult. But I think this
Yeah.
is kind of a good way where we can segue over to Jodi to talk about the mental wellness aspect of it, because like I said, because everybody is so stressed about what's going on and just kind of just wanting to do the right things and to be able to support their kids the best way. So I'm going to allow Jodi to take some time to talk about the wellness aspect.
Just hearing about all of these different factors for parents and students to consider is overwhelming. I can't imagine how anybody has gone through these last 18 months without significant amounts of overwhelm and stress. And I think when we talk about student well-being, it's really important to first talk about parent well-being. And not enough attention is focused on moms and dads or any other parents who are taking care of children. And we've seen significant amounts of depression and anxiety among parents because you're juggling so many different things. And while we understand how important it is, there's so much research that talks about how when parents are feeling better and have more emotional support, they're able to kind of take care of their children better. They just have more fuel in their own tank and their cup is full to kind of support their child. And so we've done so much work around how important it is to taking care of our parents and how we're not really doing a well enough job with that. I saw this quote and said, even the most dedicated caregivers for high levels of stress can make parenting children in general so difficult. And that's true. And that could not be more accurate to what people are feeling right now. And while there's so much that we can't control, there are some ways that we can recommend parents to kind of do to help take care of themselves better. So certainly sleep, it's so hard to get, especially with kids of different ages, but being able to get as much rest as possible will help kind of recharge your body, but also your brain and give you a chance to reset. Connection is really big during these times. So, family members and friends and colleagues, if you can give somebody a hug or you feel comfortable doing it, that's really wonderful. It kind of releases all the happy neurotransmitters and hormones. Finding ways to maximize your kind of sense of control and autonomy. So there's so much out of your control, but what can you do to feel more comfortable in the spaces that you're occupying? Also reminding yourself of your competence. There is so much that you're all doing well right now. And unfortunately, I feel like our brains are constantly overwhelmed with negative self-talk, or I didn't do this right, or I'm late for this, or and really kind of trying to pause and say, no, I'm actually doing a great job with this, and really trying to change our narrative of how we talk about ourselves. And then also to the extent that we can practice mindfulness, and that can be even on a walk or while you're eating, and just taking a few minutes, if that, to pause and inventory, how are I feeling? What do I need? Do I feel any tension within my physical body? Are there any pains? And then if you have, and it's so difficult in these settings, but time to exercise or walk, or just give yourself even 15 minutes to kind of physically release some of that stress, and endorphins will hopefully help parents take care of themselves, because we need them to take care of themselves. And also how important it is for our students, because we know that our students are also experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety right now, and that can really compromise their ability to engage in school and achieve and interact and engage with friends, and it really can be very overwhelming. And if we take the flip side, when we really do invest more in our parents and our kids and are able to take care of them, it is wonderful what happens. When students have positive well being, they achieve better and they feel this greater sense of belonging in school. They're more motivated. They have more pro social behavior like empathy and compassion and kindness. They're more satisfied with their life and what's happening around them. And they have this greater sense of self concept, which is a huge part of what we want all of our kids to develop, is like, who am I and what am I good at and what do I want? And then we also see fewer issues with internalizing, so more of like a depressed withdrawn state, externalizing more aggressive behaviors, fewer issues with suicidal ideation or suicidal tendencies. And for our older students, when they're having better well-being, we see less substance use. And so all of these are things that we expect, but I think in these particular times, it's so important to kind of remind all of the systems how much we really need to prioritize adult and student well-being right now. And there, and specifically our girls, what we've noticed is, especially as we move towards middle and upper adolescence, our girls will tend to report higher levels of depression or mood disorders than our boys. And what we've observed is that girls are especially sensitive to social stress, whereas boys tend to be more responsive to academic stress. And this is plainly about how students have identified. So this is one study that we were looking at. And so I think understanding these different areas of stress can also help us think about how do we support students and meet their needs. Key signs, I think warning signs to look for as parents are always changes in behavior. So if your student or child seems more withdrawn than usual, do they have difficulty concentrating or sitting still? Have you observed that they're feeling maybe hopeless or less optimistic, which is understandable, but maybe to a more extreme than we should hopefully see? Are you observing changes in sleeping patterns or eating habits? Are they more irritable than they normally might be? Are they exhibiting a loss of interest in usual activities or engaging with friends and family? Are they really focused on past failures or other challenges that they are having a hard time kind of moving past? You also might notice difficulty making decision or completing tasks and kind of having that more organized way of thinking. And so if you start to observe those signs in students, then they might be experiencing higher levels of stress and might need additional support. And I think the biggest thing that we can recommend is connection for students, because especially with the pandemic and for students who have been virtual or hybrid or even in person, it's not the same connection with people. And so I think ways that parents and caregivers can support students is trying to facilitate those connections with other children to the extent that it's safe for maybe family members, and trying to organize or find ways for students to just engage with one another. Helping students identify their unique strengths. I think one thing right now is everybody feels a little bit down perhaps about there's so much talk of learning loss and some of these other really negative tropes, but what is your child really good at and what makes them really special, and helping them see that within themselves can really help promote this sense of self-confidence and efficacy, which can really help bolster against some of this stress that we're all experiencing. Similarly with adults, helping students identify what can they control. So there's so much uncertainty, and we just heard about like parents getting letters every other day, and that's so overwhelming. But how can children with their parents create routines that provide anxiety, that provide comfort when there is anxiety, not provide anxiety, and kind of help kids get this sense of control over this environment, which feels really out of control in many ways. And then I think one of the last things is checking in with children and asking them, how are you feeling? Talking about their feelings with them gives them a space to process these emotions and kind of work through them in their own minds. Because when they what we've observed is that sometimes when we ruminate on things and don't express them, it just kind of leads to a buildup of more and more feelings. And so also when you're talking to children about emotions, reminding them that it's okay not to be okay and that their feelings are rational and they're fleeting. So we might be going through a really difficult season right now, but these feelings won't last forever. And I think one thing that's particularly scary, but also important to note, is if you're concerned about a child with suicidal ideation, talking to them about suicide. It doesn't encourage suicide, and it's really scary and overwhelming as a parent, and perhaps painful to hear that your child is thinking about this. But by putting it out in the open, you're actually giving your child a space to kind of navigate through these thoughts and feelings and have some sense of relief, rather than they're just kind of overwhelmed and consumed with the thoughts themselves. And then certainly if there feels like there's a real threat of harm to oneself or others, finding some kind of outside resources and support. I think also what's really important to note during this time is every student is going to be different. And even within a family, children are going to be different. So some are more susceptible and kind of sensitive to their environments, and others are just kind of generally less vulnerable, and there's pros and cons. So for those students who are really sensitive, the benefit is that when you provide them with a lot of love and nurturing, they're going to thrive. And so it's both this like when in these difficult times they may be appearing to suffer more, but we can also kind of turn that around and really help them feel supported and safe, and then we'll see them kind of take off. Whereas kind of the students who are less affected kind of tend to hover around the middle. They're less affected, they'll do great, but they might be less sensitive both to the good and the bad. And so I think those are signs to be aware of, and especially if parents, other things you might see in school, if you hear from teachers about students being avoidant or having difficulty concentrating or being restless or irritable in class, are they acting in ways that are aggressive or hostile towards other students? Or if teachers suggest that maybe the student is exhibiting signs of anxiety or depression, these are helpful indicators that your student may be feeling really stressed and having some compromised well-being, and being able to identify those as symptoms of stress is going to be really important, because sometimes we mislabel them as being in need of special education services or having a behavioral challenge, when really there's a different underlying issue that we want to support. So these are some hopefully helpful pieces of information about well-being in our children during this time.
That's so important what you say about students being mislabeled during this time, where they may be suffering from some of those post-traumatic stressors. And so it's important that parents and educators are aware of that, so that we can actually provide students with the support that they need based on their individual needs, and so that we are not mislabeling them. So I'm glad that you made that point. And so that's going to be so important. Are there any strategies that you can provide to both parents and teachers that will help them to avoid that? So to help avoid with mislabeling students, but actually being more so advocates for the type of support that they need. Are there some strategies that you can share?
So I think the biggest thing is trying to understand what's happening underneath. So I think a lot of it comes from conversations between parents and teachers and children, trying to understand what may be provoking some of these behaviors or things that teachers and educators may be observing, because there might be a reason that really has nothing to do with this kind of need for any kind of IUP or disability. It may just be a manifestation of these really challenging times. And actually, when students were asked about their experience in the pandemic, like almost 50% of students reported that their academic achievements have been compromised because of feelings of depression, stress, or anxiety. So I think the first step always is like, how are students feeling? And can we take an inventory of like, what is going on? How are you thinking? How are you feeling? And then moving from there to think about, are there other unmet needs that we haven't addressed?
Thank you for that. That's going to be so important, so
And
important for our students.
And then let me ask you a question, because like, we have Diana, who's, her goal is to make sure that kids stay healthy and safe to be able to attend school, to learn. So there's not this reduction of loss of learning. But then you have some of these kids that things become overwhelming. What is your thoughts about taking a mental health day? Like, there is always this challenge, because there's this perfect attendance award, where some kids, they go to school, they get this award at the end of the year. And then of course there's kids that have illnesses and, get sick or whatever, they're not able to get this award. And sometimes it makes me wonder, are we putting emphasis on the wrong thing? We want kids to be at school every day. We want them to learn. But how important is it that if your kid, if you get an indication that your kid is not doing well, that allowing them to have that space to have a mental health day?
Mhm.
I think that's such a great question. And in my school, we did emphasize attendance. And part of it is that's how we're evaluating school, which is also complicated but slightly problematic, because students sometimes just need a day to recharge. And so I feel like we're putting pressure on students to just like, we're kind of like wrapping them up and shipping them off the door, when like sometimes they just need a day to kind of recharge and recover. And so I think that this emphasis on attendance is important, because we do want to encourage students to go to school, of course. But if they're attending school with severely compromised like mental health or well-being, they're not really going to get much out of the experience anyway. And there's
Right.
also chances that the child may have conflict with peers or teachers, which really may lead to escalation of their own symptoms, but also maybe there are disciplinary challenges. And so really there is a lot of value in taking that rest and pause. And part of those conversations with students is thinking about what are practices that like the child can do or we can do as a family, or that teachers can help you do to kind of remain balanced. And maybe you need a bathroom break more often, or maybe there are other, you need like fidgets or something, or maybe there are other ways that we can help the students stay more regulated. Not that there's anything wrong with every once in a while needing a day to just like recharge.
And that's a good point. And Jodi, do you mind, like I said, I hope it's okay to do this, but you have an app, Well Check. Could you mind speaking a little bit about Well Check and what the app is and what it offers?
Sure. So it was really inspired by my teaching days, and what it does is it's a daily emotional check-in. So we ask students every day, how are you feeling? And we present them with between 9 and 12 different emotions from which they can select. And they can select up to 1, 2, 3, as many as they kind of see fit. And then we ask them overall, how are you doing? And we use a scale of 1 to 10. And we use that data. So that data goes to their teachers and counselors. And the goal is to really help identify students who may be struggling, or and maybe have a hard time expressing to teachers that they're having a hard time themselves. Or look, it's really hard to look an adult in the eye and say, I'm feeling sad or lonely. I think we're much more accustomed to saying I'm tired or stressed, and to give students a space to say that maybe they're not okay, and give that information to teachers so that they can follow up and say, who is of concern, who do I need to check in with, and who maybe might we refer to the counselor. And also giving students a space because they can also self-identify. So there's a button that says check on me. And so students can kind of self-identify in a really private and subtle way that they need some additional support.
And I think that's a wonderful tool to be able to just allow kids a safe space to be able to just say like, yep, no, today is not a good day for me. And then also giving the teacher the power to be able to say like, okay, I'm gonna just pull back on this particular person because there's some things that are going on. So that's some great information, and I like that idea. I know we've seen things like on Pinterest of just kind of like even with the elementary school kids, having a way for them just to kind of say like, hey, this is just not a good day, and just normalizing the process that we're not all expected to be 100% perfect day in and day out. So I really like that ideal in that program.
Thanks. For me, really quickly as a teacher, it made a big difference because when I knew that a student had something going on and it was a test or they had their head down, I was better prepared to say, okay, like, let's not take the test today, or like, keep your head down and you and I can talk later. And then what happens is later we talk and I just get to offer support. I just get to be an adult who sees them and loves them, and that's what we focus on. And then when things get a little bit easier, we can make up the test or the work that they might have missed. And when you don't have that information, something as benign as like, hey, can you pick up your head, can lead to this big explosion because students have so many feelings that they often don't have a place to put them. And so it's just like we open the floodgates, and then there sometimes is conflict, or they are in front of peers and maybe feel embarrassed. And so my hope is if we can just give students a space to say, today is not my day, and teachers can say, okay, we can really promote better relationships and help students feel really seen and safe and loved in schools.
That's great. And I just want to remind our audience who's listening in, please, we have two great presenters here today dealing with the physical health and mental health of our students in school. So please feel chime in with your comments or your questions that you want us to share with the presenters today. Jan, did you have any additional questions?
Not at this time, but just great information. Like when I think about the takeaways from your presentations, I think it's going to be very beneficial to our audience who is watching now. So I'm hoping that we can get some questions here because these ladies are a wealth of knowledge. So let's see if we can get some questions. Okay, there is one comment about building relationships with students and parents is key. And I think that that goes back to what Jodi was just sharing. And you all feel free, Dayana or Jodi, to speak more to that. But that's a comment that we have right now. Building those relationships with students and parents being key.
So I can jump in. I focus a lot of my research on stress. And one of the biggest things that we've seen is that relationships with teachers can really buffer against some of the stressors that students are facing. So there are lots of challenges that none of us can particularly control. But when you have those loving relationships with parents and teachers, it really diminishes the effects of stress on achievement or some of these other outcomes. So I think as hard as it is to be a parent and a teacher right now, my hope is that there's some solace in knowing that showing up and showing love makes it easier. And you might not see it today or tomorrow, but you'll really start to see it over time for students in how they develop both academically, but also socially and emotionally.
And Diane, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I had a question for Jodi. Well, as a parent, because I have a daughter in elementary school, you mentioned the difference between boys and girls, the way they handle stress, and girls are more social, and then boys you see more academically. So, and you also talked about the app, which is amazing, which I wish we had for parents, where the kids, because sometimes they don't want to talk to you, but they will play on their phone, and probably if the app was connected to your phone, you could know how they're feeling. But how do you approach, based on the difference between boys and girls, how would you approach as a parent your kid based on what is going on or their sex, to have them talk to you? Because teenagers usually don't like to talk. Even now I'm finding an 8-year-old usually, yeah, it's fine, that's the only thing you get. How was school? Fine. And then that's it, and then they move on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so how do you talk to them and not overwhelm them, or for them to feel like, okay, mom, you're asking too many questions, I'm fine, leave me alone?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question. And as I'm not a parent yet, one day, but I think the big thing is trying to ask specific questions. And also, I think sometimes like leading with an opening of like, is anything stressing you out? Or, and you don't,
Okay.
I know there's sometimes a sense of like, we don't want to bring up the negative, but what we've observed with students is that when you just say, how are you doing? They're like, fine. But if you kind of take them into like, what are some things that are going well? Or what are some things that maybe aren't going well? Or how are some of your relationships with your friends? Or how you feel like things are going in school? I think when you have a little bit more specific and kind of invite them to say something maybe not be going well or talk about things that are going well, that can be really helpful. One thing too is I think what we observed with girls is that they tend to ruminate on things more, and which it falls very much into like gender stereotypes, right? Like women keep thinking about things and men are on to the next. But I think that's one thing that can sometimes make it harder for, can compromise girls' well-being more so than boys. So sometimes like asking if they just want to talk or if they want to focus on solutions. And so giving them both options, because sometimes we just need to vent and talk, but other times focusing on solutions or ways to learn from a situation or improve it, and to like try to break out of the ruminative cycle.
Right.
I know as a parent, I also sometimes what I did was, because I have a 100% boy, and it's just like everything is fine, everything is good, and like I'm not thinking about anything. And I actually realized that boys sometimes they don't think about a lot, not to be mean or rude, but that is just when he says nothing is nothing. But what I used to do is, and then still do now, is like, hey, tell me something that made you mad today. Tell me something that made you laugh today that happened in class, just to try to help stimulate more open-ended questions to get him to give me some feedback. And usually what happen is that he does a data dump of his day, when it's bedtime, and I'll sit there and listen to get some information. But even one of the things I wanted to ask you, Dayana, regarding stress, when you are having those kids that are coming to your clinic, what are some of those things? I know Jodi identified some things, but I know even like kids with constipation, that may be an indication of stress. What are some of those other physical signs of stress that you see coming into your clinics as well?
It's a great question.
The number one sign I've seen is abdominal pain. Because that's usually how it presents. So then I usually ask them, okay, did you eat today? Did you have dinner last night? Did you sleep? Is there something going on at school? How are things at home? How are things with your brother? So I asked them more questions. They was like, oh yeah, no, I didn't eat. Why didn't you eat? Well, I didn't like the food, or I didn't feel like eating. But that's when you find out, no, I didn't sleep well because my room was dark. And then you talk and talk, and then when it comes to for the time for them to rate their pain, and then they'll rate it like a 4 or a 2. So that usually was like, okay, so it's not really physical pain, it's something more related to stress or not having to eat. But the number one sign is abdominal pain, and then followed by headache. Those are the two main one related to stress that I've seen in the student population.
So I have a teenage boy, and that's mainly what he would complain about is a headache when he was overly stressed. And to you all's point, I would always ask him, well, what was your favorite part of today? And what was your least favorite part of today, to, get the information out of him, because boys are different in that way. I would, if I did not ask in that way, then I would get it was all right, or it was fine, like most of them. So yeah, just asking, in a more explicit way, what was your favorite part? I would get the information. But I'm glad that you brought that up, Beth, in that there are physical things that are happening to them as well. And they may not even share that with us. I know, and we as parents don't know oftentimes to associate it with stress, and then especially during this pandemic, my son went through a phase where he was having headaches like often, and that's not something that we had to deal with previously. And so I didn't know to associate it with stress, honestly, until speaking with his counselor. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Beth, because that's important to know too, that there are physical things happening to them.
And everything is in puberty. Puberty gets blamed on a lot of things. And I think that's the big thing, is that as parents, we got to know the signs and symptoms of puberty. You know, they're the intermittent mood swings, but not the constant withdrawal depression. That has nothing to do with your body transitioning from, you know, childhood to young adulthood to adulthood.
Right.
And that we have to, and I think there's so many things that have happened to kids that have gotten lost under that, oh, it's puberty, or they're just going through changes or whatever. You know, they're human beings that are allowed to be stressed. They're human beings that have different things going on, and we just have to look at them differently compared to when I grew up. Because when I grew up, it was that, hey, you don't have a job, you don't have to pay bills, so you shouldn't be stressed. And we know that's not true, but that's what we used to get taught. And so we trying to transitioning from that. So with these last 5 minutes before we head off, you know, Dayana, I just want to give you an opportunity first to say, like, if there are any things, key things that parents should be aware of as far as monitoring their kids, being educated in the midst of the pandemic. A couple of minutes to discuss your final thoughts on what we can do better as parents.
My final thoughts would be to make sure you keep an eye on them. Like they said, their physical stress can show us that's physical sign as well. But also do a lot of prevention. Make sure that they eat well. Make sure that they sleep. They have at least 7, 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep at night. Sometimes you can do prevention. Make sure they take their vitamins, a lot of vitamin C. Now they have elderberries gummies for kids. They get outside and exercise, get fresh air, because prevention is key. And you also teach them exactly how to take care of themselves, washing their hands and things like that. But if by any chance they have any symptoms, make sure you get them checked. If you know your kids suffer from seasonal allergies and you know it's the time of the year, you can get them on the Claritin early or Zyrtex, whatever works for them. And keep an open mind. Make sure that they know that you're there for them, so they could let you know exactly what's going on with them and not afraid. Because sometimes they come and I'm like, did you let daddy know or mommy know that your belly was hurting this morning? No. Why? Well, they were in a rush and I didn't want them to be late for work and things like that. So they come to school hurting and not letting you know. So make sure you get some times and leave the door open for them to talk to you.
Excellent point. Excellent. And what about you, Jodi? Anything, any quick tips that we can, well, I shouldn't say quick when you're talking about mental health, but, you know, any tips that just remind us for our community to make sure they're aware of going forward in this pandemic?
I think one big thing is like having grace with ourselves and then with our kids, because taking care of ourselves is so important. Taking care of our students and our children, and modeling that, like, some days are just going to be hard days, or like, this is how I work through challenges, how I think through challenges. And also just like paying attention to your own bodies and feelings, and then your kids' bodies and feelings. So a great point about like the different somatic ways that stress may appear in children: headaches, stomach aches, and also behavioral changes. And then also, I think not feeling comfortable asking for help when needed, and that can be in the form of like friends and community members, but also mental health care workers, and that's what they're here for. And there sometimes can feel like a stigma around getting counseling or therapy or other forms of help for different mental health issues or just compromised well-being. And my hope is that in the pandemic, we start to kind of diminish that stigma and people really can get the support they need, because it only makes us all better when we're better together.
Very true. And if any of our audience, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to the professionals in your community. Odyssey Family Counseling supports the South Fulton community. So please reach out to those professionals. They are ready to assist you and your families with any help or support that you might need. So please reach out to them if you are in need of help.
Well, ladies, I truly appreciate you all coming on today. I think this with everything that's going on, this was just very timely for us to kick off our first Wellness Wednesday for our community. And and for those people who were not able to be on today, like I said, this will be on the South Fulton Mental Health Collaborative Facebook page and the IG platform. So you can go back and review it when you get an opportunity to go over this great information that they presented. So Dayana, Jodi, thank you so much for your time and giving of yourself today to help our community. And we will be back the first Wednesday of the month. And so next month we'll be back with our next topic. So everyone have a great rest of your day. And ladies, thank you again and have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.